Warning, this is a venture into the realm of internet whining. Have you ever played the game Deserted Island? There are innumerable variations of this amusing pastime, but typically they go like this. Imagine that you're on a deserted island and you can only have 5 fill in the blank. Which 5 would you choose? Opera junkies like myself ask, imagine that you're on a deserted island and you can only have 5 opera recordings. Which would you choose? Opera lovers who have imbibed too much wine will sometimes play the variation, if you could have 5 opera singers on your deserted island. Whom would you choose? I, of course, won't play this game, so I won't say Diana Damrau, Anna Netrebko, or Erika Miklosha. I digress. My favorite opera is far and away the German composer Richard Strauss's Der Rosenkavalier, so it would be first on my deserted island wish list. I started listening to this opera when I was a kid. It was the first grand opera I ever saw, and I have very special memories whenever I hear the recognizable music. Thanks to my father's love of the opera and generosity, I have 3 different audio recordings plus 2 DVD recordings. Richard Strauss wrote many operas, including a rarely performed work entitled Electra, based on Sophocles' Greek tragedy. If we were playing the game What is Hell to You, it would be an eternity of Electra. I hate it. It's all screeching and high sopranic blathering. I won't subject you to it. Just think of your worst stereotype of a Wagnerian Valkyrie, and that's Electra. How can it be that someone could write one work so sonorous and beautiful and another thing so awful? Can both sweet and bitter water come from the same composer? The same incongruity is true of the author Nikos Kazantzakis, famous for his brilliant novel Zorba the Greek, made into an Academy Award-winning film starring Anthony Quinn and Lila Kadrova. Kazantzakis also wrote another novel that was later made into a movie, the blasphemous and trashy story The Last Temptation of Christ. How can it be that someone could write one thing so brilliant and another thing so blasphemous? Well, it happens all the time. Consider Martin Luther, the great Reformational theologian. Luther changed the course of history through his courageous rediscovery of the doctrine of justification by faith and his unwavering commitment to the priesthood of all believers. Luther protested against the institutional church, and his protesting followers, also known as Protestants, are marked by Luther's brilliant legacy. Then, on the proverbial other hand, one of Luther's major works was his 60,000-word treatise Von den Juden und ihren Lügen, which means On the Jews and Their Lies, published in 1543, 3 years before his death. Luther argued that the Jews were no longer the chosen people, but, quote, the devil's people. He referred to them with violent, vile language and advocated setting synagogues on fire, destroying Jewish prayer books, forbidding rabbis from preaching, seizing Jews' properties and money, and smashing up their homes, so that these, quote, poisonous, envenomed worms would be forced into labor or expelled for all time. Luther wrote, quote, we are at fault in not slaying them. Luther was the most widely read author of his generation, and he acquired the status of a prophet within Germany. According to the prevailing view among historians, both Jewish and Gentile, his anti-Jewish rhetoric contributed significantly to the development of anti-Semitism in Germany, and in the 1930s and 1940s provided an ideal underpinning for the National Socialist, that's Nazi, attacks on Jews. Heinrich Himmler wrote admiringly of Luther's writings and his sermons on the Jews in 1940. A copy of Luther's treatise against the Jews was publicly exhibited in a glass case at the Nuremberg rallies and quoted in a 54-page explanation of the Aryan Law by Dr. E.H. Schultz and Dr. R. Fricks. In Mein Kampf, Hitler refers to Martin Luther as a great warrior, a true statesman, and a great reformer. Now tell me, do you think that we should throw out everything that Martin Luther wrote because of his fervent anti-Semitism? Or do we selectively pick out the excellent while discarding the trash? How about John Calvin? Calvin, like Luther, was a significant shaper of the Protestant Reformation. However, consider this about Calvin. On October 27, 1553, Calvin had Michael Servetus, a Spanish physician, burnt at the stake just outside of Geneva for his doctrinal heresies. Calvin, the originator of the popular doctrine of once saved, always saved, condoned murdering a, quote, doctrinal heretic, which of course is what the Bible commands us to do with doctrinal heretics, right? This event was something Calvin had been considering long before Servetus was even captured. Calvin wrote a friend 7 years prior to Servetus' arrest, "If he, Servetus, comes to Geneva, I shall never let him go out alive if my authority has weight." Evidently, in that day, Calvin's authority in Geneva, Switzerland, had ultimate weight. During Servetus' trial, Calvin wrote, "I hope that the verdict will call for the death penalty." John Calvin, brilliant theologian and accessory to murder. Now tell me, do you think we should throw out everything that John Calvin wrote because he had someone put to death because of their theology? Or do we selectively pick out the brilliant while discarding the trash? How about this one? Would you believe anything that you read written by a minister who was a periodic alcoholic, abandoned his first wife and 2 children and refused to support them, lied about his biblical credentials, spent time in federal prison because of questionable financial transactions and forgery, is reported to have fathered children outside of marriage, and was sponsored by a secret society to do a new translation of the Bible? Or do we entirely reject everything that Cyrus Scofield wrote? That's C.I. Scofield. How about this one? Would you believe anything written by an author who believed in praying for the dead, who believed in purgatory, and who prior to his death received the sacrament of extreme unction from the Roman Catholic Church? Or would you selectively choose what of C.S. Lewis you thought was good and reject the rest? How about B.B. Warfield? While teaching at Princeton, Warfield argued extensively for an authoritative view of the Bible. He also believed that the soul of man is mortal and that the Bible teaches that God alone possesses immortality, meaning that those who don't place their faith in Christ won't be tormented for eternity, a teaching at odds with many theologians. Do we discard Warfield entirely, or do we discern truth from error? My guess is that most pastors in America will have something from Luther, Calvin, Scofield, Lewis, or Warfield in their libraries. Why? Does this mean that they unreservedly support all that these men wrote? I doubt it. Which brings me to the question du jour. If many of us are so willing to overlook bad theology or bad character and try to discern good from bad, why do we only do it with dead theologians and not with living ones? Why do we castigate Rob Bell, Brian McLaren, Mike Yaconelli, and Erwin McManus? These newer theologians are unquestionably making mistakes, but do we therefore throw out everything they say? Martin Luther did remarkable things for the kingdom, and he endorsed wholesale slaughter of the Jews, something not lost in my household, particularly since 33 of my wife's relatives died in Auschwitz. I've never heard a contemporary theologian call for pogroms, but somehow we can find more grace for a vitriolic anti-Semite who gave impetus to the Nazis than we can for contemporary writers or theologians who are undoubtedly off base on some things, but indisputably right on other things. I don't get it. Am I missing something here? Why do we go black and white on some people and write them off, but go casually gray and forgiving on others? I would heartily recommend Rob Bell's Pneuma series, which you can watch for free online, and I would recommend his sermons, which you can download for free. Dozens of people have told me how Rob Bell has inspired them to study their Bible, particularly in its historical context, and how he has restored their faith in preaching as an efficacious means of communicating. Can someone please help me understand, why is Rob Bell so bad and Martin Luther so good? Not long ago, someone sent me a tape of a sermon chastising Rob Bell and Mike Yaconelli to the point of wondering if these men were even really Christians. In the spirit of true disclosure, Mike Yaconelli, by the way, was my mother's pastor for many years before he died. He also did my eldest sister's funeral. One of our colleagues teaches at a Christian school in Budapest, Hungary, and not long ago he had to go through a critical review process because he recommended to his students that they read an article written by Rob Bell. Some parents had never heard of Rob Bell, so they went on the internet and found oodles and oodles of web pages criticizing Rob Bell as a heretic. I wonder if the same response would have happened if he recommended reading something by Martin Luther. I'm honestly asking, can someone help me understand the double standard? I'm tempted to recommend to our colleague in Hungary that he give out the Rob Bell article but say that it was written by Martin Luther and then see if anyone has a problem with that. But of course, that isn't the right thing to do. That would be wrong and unbiblical and ultimately sinful, which means that you can pretty much disregard everything I just said.